November 8, 2018. Paradise, California woke up to clear skies. The town sat on a ridge in the Sierra Nevada foothills, elevation 1,700 feet, population 26,800. Most people were getting ready for work. Schools were preparing to open. The temperature was cool, around 50 degrees. It was Thursday. Paradise had existed for over a century as a retirement community and a refuge from California's larger cities. The town stretched across narrow roads that wound through dense ponderosa pines and oak trees. Houses sat tucked between the trees, many of them wooden, built decades earlier when fire codes were different. The town had one main evacuation route, Skyway, a two-lane road that curved down the ridge toward Chico. By 6:30 a.m., the morning routine was in motion. Coffee brewing, cars warming up, children eating breakfast. Nothing suggested this day would be different from any other. At 6:33 a.m., a PG&E transmission line failed near Polga, about 10 miles northeast of Paradise. The line had been installed in 1921. A hook holding the line had worn down over 97 years. When the line separated, it struck a steel tower. Sparks fell into dry grass below. The humidity that morning was 24%. The vegetation was desiccated after months of drought. The Jarbo Gap where the spark landed was covered in brush that hadn't burned in decades. Within minutes, the fire had consumed an acre. At 7 a.m., CAL FIRE spotted the smoke. They called it the campfire, named after Camp Creek Road nearby. The fire was already 80 acres. Then the wind arrived. Gusts reached 50 miles per hour. The fire didn't spread, it exploded. It moved at a rate fire scientists had rarely documented, 1 football field per second. The flames jumped from tree to tree, creating their own weather system. Superheated air rose, pulling in more oxygen, feeding the burn. By 7:30 a.m., the fire had traveled 8 miles. It was now at the edge of Paradise. The evacuation order came at 7:57 a.m. for the eastern zones of Paradise. Within 15 minutes, it expanded to the entire town, but by then, the fire was already inside the city limits. Embers carried by 50-mile-per-hour winds had leapfrogged the town's edge and landed in residential areas. Dozens of spot fires ignited simultaneously across Paradise. The single evacuation route, Skyway, became a parking lot within minutes. Thousands of cars tried to funnel onto a road designed for normal traffic. The fire was faster. It caught people in their vehicles. Some abandoned their cars and ran on foot. Others tried alternate routes and found roads blocked by flame. The fire consumed structures at a rate of 1 every 3 seconds during its peak. Homes, stores, schools, the hospital, all burned. The Adventist Health Feather River Hospital evacuated 60 patients as flames surrounded the building. Nurses pushed gurneys through smoke. The hospital itself caught fire while staff were still inside. Paradise Elementary School burned. The Safeway burned. Nearly every commercial building in town was destroyed within hours. By noon, 85% of Paradise was gone. The fire burned so hot it created its own thunderstorm. Pyrocumulonimbus clouds formed above the town, generating lightning. The temperature in some areas exceeded 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt aluminum. By the end of November 8th, Paradise was unrecognizable. The fire had consumed 18,800 structures. Of those, 13,972 were homes. The entire downtown was ash. Street signs remained, marking roads that led to nothing. Traffic lights hum over intersections where no cars would drive. The population had evacuated. 26,800 people displaced in a single day. 85 people died in the fire. Most were elderly. Some died in their cars, trapped in traffic. Others died in their homes, unable to evacuate in time. Several bodies were found in driveways, feet from vehicles they couldn't reach. The search for remains took weeks. Cadaver dogs moved through ash, marking locations. Forensic teams sifted through debris. Some victims were identified through dental records, others through jewelry or medical implants. 5 people were never found. The campfire burned for 17 days. It consumed 153,336 acres. It became the deadliest wildfire in California history and the most destructive in terms of structures lost. When the fire was finally contained on November 25th, Paradise was still smoldering. In the months after the fire, Paradise resembled a war zone. The infrastructure remained, but everything else was gone. Power lines stood without homes to power. Water lines ran to properties that no longer existed. Roads connected neighborhoods that had been erased. The few buildings that survived stood isolated in fields of ash, a gas station with no surrounding town, a church with no congregation nearby. The post office remained, but there was no one to deliver mail to. The town's entire commercial district was gone. Every grocery store, every restaurant, every retail shop burned. The hospital was destroyed. The schools were destroyed. The library, the town hall, the police station, all reduced to their foundations. For those who returned to see what remained, the landscape was disorienting. Streets they had driven for years looked unfamiliar without landmarks. People got lost in their own neighborhoods because nothing was left to navigate by. The only way to find your property was by counting driveways or checking GPS coordinates. What the fire left behind was a grid of empty lots, covered in ash and debris. Metal frames of cars, twisted and burned. Brick chimneys standing alone. Concrete foundations outlining where homes used to be. And underneath all of it, the toxic residue of a modern town that had burned. Melted plastic, burned chemicals, contaminated soil. The cleanup took over a year. Before residents could rebuild, the EPA had to remove 1.7 million tons of debris. Contaminated soil was hauled away. Toxic ash was treated as hazardous waste. The operation cost over $1 billion. But even as the cleanup continued, something unexpected happened. People started buying land in Paradise. Not everyone. Many survivors never returned, couldn't return, or chose not to. But others saw opportunity. The price of land dropped immediately after the fire. Properties that had been worth $200,000 were now selling for $50,000 or less. Vacant lots, already cleared of debris, were even cheaper. Investors arrived. Some were from the Bay Area, looking for affordable land within driving distance of major cities. Others were developers seeing a chance to rebuild from scratch. But many were former residents who had lost everything and wanted to come back. The location still held value. Paradise sat between Chico and the Sierra Nevada, in a region with natural beauty and relatively affordable cost of living, at least compared to coastal California. The ridge offered views. The elevation meant cooler summers. The community had been tight-knit, and many residents had lived there for decades. They weren't ready to abandon it. Rebuilding began in 2019, but it was slow. Insurance companies paid out over $10 billion in claims, but many policies didn't cover the full cost of rebuilding. Some residents were underinsured. Others faced delays as insurance companies disputed claims or went bankrupt from the sheer volume of losses. Building codes had changed after the fire. New homes had to meet stricter fire-resistant standards, non-combustible roofing, ember-resistant vents, defensible space around structures. These requirements added cost and complexity. Contractors were overwhelmed with demand, not just in Paradise, but across California, as multiple fires had destroyed communities. Permits took months, materials were expensive, labor was scarce. Some people gave up and sold their land. Others lived in RVs or trailers on their properties while they waited for new homes to be built. A few moved into tiny homes or modular structures, anything to return to Paradise. By the end of 2019, fewer than 5,000 people had returned. The population was a fraction of what it had been. The town that once had 26,800 residents now had ghost neighborhoods where only one or two houses stood on entire blocks. Schools reopened, but with far fewer students. Businesses slowly returned, but the commercial district remained mostly empty. There was no grocery store for months. Residents had to drive to Chico for basic supplies. By 2020, Paradise had rebuilt about 1,500 homes. The population stabilized around 4,500 people. Those who returned described a strange mix of grief and resilience. The town was quieter. Streets that had once been full of traffic were empty. Neighborhoods that had been densely packed with homes now had wide gaps between structures. The trees were gone. The pines that had defined Paradise's landscape had burned, leaving a bare, exposed ridge. New trees were planted, but they would take decades to grow. The town looked raw, unfinished, like a sketch of what it used to be. But infrastructure was improving. Water lines were repaired, power was restored. The town hall was rebuilt. A temporary medical clinic opened. Schools consolidated but continued operating. And despite everything, a sense of community persisted. People who had returned shared something. They had all chosen to come back. They had all decided Paradise was worth rebuilding. Town meetings were packed. Volunteer groups formed to help with cleanup and rebuilding. Neighbors helped neighbors. There was a determination to prove Paradise could survive. Then came the complications. PG&E, the utility company whose equipment had started the fire, filed for bankruptcy in 2019. They faced over $30 billion in liabilities from the campfire and other blazes. Survivors sued. Legal battles dragged on. In 2020, PG&E reached a $13.5 billion settlement with wildfire victims, but the process of distributing funds was slow and contentious. Some survivors received payouts that didn't come close to covering their losses. Others were still waiting years later. Meanwhile, PG&E remained the only power provider in the region. The same company responsible for the fire was still in charge of the electrical grid. Residents didn't trust them, but they had no alternative. PG&E began implementing public safety power shutoffs, preemptive blackouts during high fire danger conditions. The policy was meant to prevent another disaster, but it left Paradise without power for days at a time, sometimes multiple times per month during fire season. For a town trying to rebuild, the blackouts were devastating. Businesses couldn't operate. Residents who depended on medical equipment had to evacuate or find generators. Schools closed. The shutoffs reminded everyone that Paradise was still vulnerable.
By 2023, 5 years after the fire, Paradise's population had grown to around 6,500. About 3,500 homes had been rebuilt. The town was a fraction of its former size, but it was functioning. New buildings followed strict fire codes. Roads had been widened to improve evacuation routes. Vegetation management programs cleared brush regularly. The town invested in emergency sirens and better communication systems. But the psychology of living in Paradise had changed. Every fire season brought anxiety. Every red flag warning triggered memories. Some residents kept bags packed, ready to evacuate at any moment. Others installed sprinkler systems around their homes or kept defensible space cleared year-round. The trauma of November 8, 2018 never fully left. Still, real estate activity continued. Land sales picked up, investors kept buying, new businesses opened. Paradise was no longer in freefall. It had stabilized into a new reality. It wasn't the town it had been, and it would never be again. But it still existed.
Today, Paradise is a place defined by what happened and by what it's become since. The fire is the central fact of the town's identity now. Every conversation eventually traces back to it. Every rebuilding decision is shaped by it. The town's population remains well below pre-fire levels, but it's no longer shrinking. About 8,000 people live there now. Some are original residents who returned. Others are newcomers, drawn by cheap land and the chance to build something new. The tension between grief and optimism defines Paradise. For some, the town is a memorial to what was lost. For others, it's a blank slate. The empty lots are either reminders of destruction or opportunities for development, depending on who you ask. The real estate market reflects this split. Prices have recovered somewhat, but remain lower than before the fire. A home that would have cost $300,000 in 2018 might sell for $250,000 now. Land is still cheap. For people priced out of California's coastal cities, Paradise offers something rare, affordability. But it comes with the knowledge that the town burned once and could burn again. The question isn't whether Paradise will face another fire. The question is when, and whether the town will be ready. Because Paradise didn't disappear. It didn't become unlivable forever. But it became something else. A place where people live with risk, where every fire season is a test, and where rebuilding never really ends.